In this section, we will review the study design of national surveys. Once you understand one design, many national surveys are constructed in a very similar way. So what we need to do is think about the population. These are national surveys, so we want a sample to be representative of the US population, with some exception. For example, in most cases, institutionalized individuals would not be included. You would maybe include just the civilians and not the military, and so on. So from the population, we sit at the table and we decide how do we construct the sample. Then from the sample, we collect the data, and the data is analyzed in a very particular way so that we can actually make inference to the original population. Understanding this design is critical. You have to be very comfortable with this design and the analysis before you attempt to analyze this type of data. The beauty is that these data are freely available. You can download them, and they are already identified. The data sets are very clean. However, you have to be very careful how you analyze them. If you use simple statistics as you have learned in the past, such as the t-test, the chi-square, even the logistic regression, will not work because they all assume a simple random sample. Remember, one of the assumptions of the test is data independence. However, surveys are not constructed under this assumption. These are not simple random samples. You don't just pick individuals randomly throughout the US. But you will see that we are using clustering, stratification, oversampling, and this, particularly the clustering, means that some of the data will have some correlation, and so the assumption of data independence from the traditional statistical test will not hold. So you cannot use those tests. And we will see how we can think about sampling with or without replacement and what it means. Sampling with replacement means that an individual may be sampled multiple times. So for example, if we were sampling with replacement in a small survey, you may be called multiple times because you're sampled the first time, then you're placed back into the sample, and so you could be, your number could be drawn again, and then you could end up being called again. Without replacement means that once you are participating in the study, you can no longer participate again. The analysis differ whether we assume with replacement or without replacement. However, there is a nice feature is that because these are so large that whether you replace the person or do not replace them, it's pretty much the same. So we can assume that these surveys are done with replacement, but in practice, we can actually run the analysis as if the sampling was done without replacement. The reason is that it's such a large number of individuals that the likelihood of you being called again, even if you're put back into the sample, will be close to zero. And so we can use some simpler analysis that can be done when we assume the design was done with replacement, and we can move on from there. So in practice, it is done without replacement, but for analysis purposes, we assume the design was done with replacement. It doesn't really make a difference in practice. So there are different types of random samples. The typical analysis you run every day assumes a simple random sample. So anyone in the United States has an equal chance of participating in the study. Stratified random sample means that groups of individuals are grouped together into strata. These are fairly homogeneous subgroups, and then they're sampled within each stratum. So in this case, for example, you might have regions, you might have race, and so on. These are mutually exclusive and exhaustive strata, so you cannot have overlap, and all of the strata put together will sum up to the population. By doing this, when you sample within strata, you can capture small population subgroups. Cluster samples are a sampling that is made around some logical grouping, for example, counties. So multi-stage sampling is a complex form of cluster sampling, where you're sampling at different layers, and these layers are clustered inside cluster, and so on. The reason you do cluster sampling is because you can have, especially with the enhanced, where you actually go and examine individuals, you can't just simply randomly go around the United States. It would be impossible. So you need to choose some areas and then collect most of the data in those areas and then go to another area. So these are clusters. So, for example, you might go to a county and then collect all of the information, most of the information for many people in that county, but not maybe the adjacent county. And so you select one cluster and not the other. So the clusters are not exhaustive, meaning are just samples of the overall. And systematic samples are when every case individual is selected. For example, you wait for people to come through the door, and every 3 people you select a person. So that is not something we use in national surveys. However, the stratification and the clustering are something that is actually done they're both done in national surveys.